A disgrace to the human race. That's what Jimmy Carter called the tax code nearly 40 years ago. And since then, it's much more of a disgrace. Much, much, much more. Nearly 75,000 pages long, on the way to 100,000.
Well, Republican presidential candidates are now talking about what to do with it. Dale Hurd brings us the story.
Tax filing deadline day means the annual political ritual of leaders from both parties calling for some sort of change in the tax code. But this year, with a crowded field of 2016 Republican presidential contenders, there are loud calls to liberate Americans and American business from the heavy burden of taxes. With the passing of April 15th, many Americans got their annual lesson in just how Byzantine and out of control America's tax code has become. Today, the tax code is nearly 75,000 pages and 187 times longer than a century ago, according to a study reported in the Washington Examiner. Most of the growth in the tax code has come in the past 30 years. Unsurprisingly, Republicans are talking about tax reform, like a flat tax rate of 17%. Republican candidate Marco Rubio is calling for a top rate of 35% for the wealthiest Americans, and 15% for those making less than $150,000 a year, while cutting the tax rate for businesses from 35% to 25%.
We have a tax code, for example, that has the highest combined corporate tax rate on the planet.
Republicans want to repeal the estate tax, something President Obama opposes. And the president was also pushing his own middle-class tax breaks in North Carolina this week.
The idea that in this country, we do best when everybody's getting a fair shot.
And the Republican leadership wants to rein in the IRS, too.
And this week, we'll pass a series of bills to stop the IRS abuses and help hardworking taxpayers.
One study says if the tax code continues to grow at the pace it did over the last century, it will pass 100,000 pages in 2050. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. It's a nightmare. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time we do something. But you see, the special interests don't want it. If you did a flat tax, you'd have to do away with the mortgage interest deduction. They don't have one of those in Canada. They got a very robust home building industry. You don't need all those tax breaks. You don't need a break if you're going to build $1 million house to have a mortgage deduction. It's not necessary. We could take away so many of those other preferences. Just take them all out. And then you put in a 17 to a 20% flat tax, and that's it. And you give a charitable deduction and maybe 2 or 3 others, and that's it. You do away with all those preferences and all those deductions, and I tell you, everybody's going to scream. The realtors will scream. The mortgage people will scream. The bankers will scream. Everybody will scream. Tough luck. Do it and do it right. And then you've got fair. And, you know, Obama talking about fairness, when you realize a majority of his constituents never pay any taxes at all, and he's talking about a fair tax. It's ridiculous. And but that's it. And what Rubio says about the corporate tax is absolutely right. It's the highest in the world. We ought to come down to a 25% corporate income tax. Again, take away certain of the deductions. And one of the things, there's so much money captive overseas because corporations don't want to repatriate. They make money in a low-tax environment, and they bring it back to the United States, and they get slapped with this huge tax. You see, we not only have a federal tax, we have state taxes. So corporations located in California, they get hammered. It's almost a 50% tax. And that can't sustain itself. But because of all this lobbying that goes on, nobody seems to want to do anything. And it takes courage. We had Alan Simpson on our Clash of the Titans at Regent University, and he and a man named Erskine Bowles put together what is called the Simpson-Bowles proposal. It was brilliant. They had trade-offs. They said, okay, you want to get a break here, you've got to save money on the other side. It was balanced. It was beautiful. It was commissioned by the president. And guess what? He didn't even look at it, didn't even discuss it. And it would have made a huge difference in the way we do business in our government. But the president, it was just too busy to read it. Well, in other news, Christian businesses in Indiana are facing tough choices after the recent firestorm over the religious freedom law. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Thanks, Pat. Media scrutiny over Indiana's religious freedom law may have died down, but Christian business owners there still face a big choice. Will they be forced to choose between their faith or their livelihood? David Brody brings us that story from Indianapolis.
Walk into a business these days in Indiana and you may see these welcoming signs about serving everyone, but don't be misled. This isn't just famous Hoosier hospitality on display, it's a show of support against the religious freedom law that gay activists felt was discriminatory.
Well, we never really thought this law was going to be that controversial.
Micah Clark played a major role in the original law's passage, which was intended to provide additional religious liberty legal protections to those who were sued. He says the updated version adds sexual orientation protection beyond anything provided by the state. That means Christian businesses may not be able to use this new Religious Freedom Reformation Act known as RFRA.
Yeah, it's not only going to be harder in certain places, you won't even be allowed to use RFRA in certain places. They've basically taken a map of Indiana and cut parts out of it where cities have these ordinances and said RFRA cannot apply in these cases.
What's the end game then for the gay and lesbian?
They simply want to put sexual orientation and gender identity in our civil rights code as if sexual behavior is the same as a benign genetic trait like skin color. I don't see sexual behavior that way.
The controversial Indiana law, written right here at the State House in Indianapolis, has a lot of Christian business owners wondering what their next move is going to be as they try to navigate the worlds of discrimination and religious liberty.
We don't want to discriminate anybody.
Casey Sampson and his Christian family own a leather shop north of Indianapolis. He's not quite sure what to expect under the new law. One thing's for sure, though, he's not going to sacrifice his Christian beliefs.
I don't want to put something that specifically is contrary to my belief, because I have to hand make that. You know, when I'm stamping into this belt that God is great, and then somebody else wants to come in and, you know, said Satan is great, that's going to hurt me.
That's personal.
It's very personal.
But now, if Casey says no, this religious liberty law may not give him further protections in court if he's sued.
For a family-owned business, this could be potentially very detrimental to this business.
You know,
potentially, if a lawsuit starts.
It could. If a lawsuit came up and the court ruled against our favor, it would devastate our family business.
This whole situation has made the family rethink how they do business.
We've honestly put a lot of thought into not doing any custom orders anymore, and that'll hurt business.
Indiana's reputation has taken a hit as well. It's gotten so much bad press that the state's Economic and Tourism Agency hired a PR firm this week to encourage businesses to come back to Indiana. Right now, the only known commodity is frustration on both sides of this hotly contested issue. David Brody, CBN News, in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Pat, as David just said, it's a hotly contested issue, but it's also a closely watched issue.
You know, the amazing thing, there was a federal law passed. Bill Clinton signed it into law when he was president, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It was not controversial because essentially it said that the freedom of conscience guaranteed by the First Amendment. We now have a candidate whose name is Hillary Clinton who wants to do away with the First Amendment, at least part of it. And this whole thing is shocking. But the First Amendment primarily guaranteed freedom of religion. It was just secondarily freedom of the press. That just said press, and that was all it said. And speech. But speech and press were secondary to our religious beliefs. And Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the First Amendment. And then it starts talking about speech or press. But the primary function is to preserve our religious freedom, because our religious freedom is the foundation of our democracy. Without it, we do not have any rights, because our rights come from God, not from the king, not from the parliament, not from the Duma, not from any legislative body. They come from God. Now, this bunch of gays, what they have done is single out, you know, for example, there'll be a city and there'll be 5 bake shops. 4 out of the 5 will do wedding cakes for anybody that wants them. Gay, lesbian, Muslim, Hindu, anybody. They'll do cakes. One little company says, no, we're Christian, we won't do homosexual wedding cakes. Okay. So they sue that one and force that one, because the idea now is not tolerance, it is conformity. They're going to make you go along with their lifestyle whether you like it or not. Now, that's not freedom, ladies and gentlemen. That is totalitarian coercion. And that's what those people want. Liberals are not liberal. They are totalitarian socialists. They want the government to force everybody into their mold. So just keep that in mind. Now, I watched a PBS piece a couple days ago called Frontline. It must have been an older documentary, and it was voiced by an actor named Trevor Howard, who I understand is now dead. It was one of the most moving things. When the cameras went into Bergen-Belsen, went into Dachau, went into Auschwitz, I remember myself driving up to Dachau and going in that awful gate with that thing at the top said, "Work makes free." And then you see the pictures of what they did. You know, those prisoners, they would hang them. And they would take their arms and hold them behind them and strap them up and then hang them in agony, ripping their shoulders out. That was just one of the things they did. I looked at the gas ovens. I saw what they did. There's no question about it. The Holocaust is real. Well, this picture on PBS, they showed mass graves where they were dumping the dead bodies of those who died from starvation, from typhus, from torture. And they had 5,000 people per grave, and then they would cover them over with bulldozers. It was the most awful thing to think that a civilized country like Germany could do something like that, but they did. And they kept on doing it. And Hitler was bad, sure, but the rest of them were complicit in it. And what they did in those camps, it wasn't just Jews, it was Poles, especially Polish people. It was Hungarians, it was Czechs, it was mentally defective, you name it. They kept gassing and killing and killing. It was an orgy of killing. Now that's the Holocaust. And it was aimed, of course, at eliminating the Jews. It was a genocide. Folks, never again. Never again. And yet in our day and age, it's happening. The Arabs are trying to eliminate the Israelis. The Iranians want to take a bomb to eliminate Israel. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke out about it. Here's John with more.
That's right. Prime Minister Netanyahu had this stark warning. He says Iran wants to wipe out the Jewish state just as the Nazis tried to destroy the Jewish people. Netanyahu issued his warning as Israel marked Holocaust Remembrance Day. The ceremony at Yad Vashem included 6 Holocaust survivors. The annual ceremony, or annual memorial rather, is one of the most solemn on Israel's calendar. Restaurants, cafes, and entertainment venues shut down, and TV programming is almost entirely exclusively dedicated to the Holocaust. We'll have an in-depth look at a new project to preserve the memory of the Holocaust coming up shortly here on the 700 Club. Well, turning to health news, it sounds strange, but it's working. New treatments based on viruses are the latest weapon in the fight against cancer. As Lori Johnson explains, so far doctors are seeing amazing results on patients who previously had little hope.
It was very exciting.
Stacy Erholtz was amazed that the tumors on her forehead, collarbone, and spine went away after she was injected with a modified measles virus.
I think it's just remarkable. Who would have thought?
For 10 years, Stacy battled multiple myeloma, an incurable cancer of the blood. She tried chemotherapy, even 2 stem cell transplants, but nothing helped, until she agreed to be part of the Mayo Clinic's trial for the new treatment called immunotherapy.
Well, it's a very simple concept. Viruses naturally come into the body and they destroy tissue.
Other medical centers are also reporting success in their trials using different viruses to treat different cancers, such as the polio virus to shrink brain tumors and the HIV virus on leukemia. The viruses are engineered in a lab to attack the cancer cells while leaving the healthy ones alone. And they trigger the patient's own immune system to fight the cancer.
We recently have begun to think about the idea of a single-shot cure for cancer, and that's our goal with this therapy.
People like Stacy, who have been injected with a concentrated virus, admit it's a bit scary.
And I received enough, apparently, to vaccinate 100 million people, which was alarming, and I was happy to hear that after the fact.
Immunotherapy doesn't cure everyone, but if doctors continue to see success stories like Stacy's, using viruses to attack cancer could soon become an accepted treatment when all else fails. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Could the first person to live to be 1,000 years old be alive today? Well, an expert and theoretician on aging believes it's very possible. Motherboard Online magazine reports Aubrey de Grey is at the center of a growing number of researchers who believe a biological revolution is coming, and that revolution could soon lead to new therapies and procedures producing much longer lifespans. The research involves finding ways to undo the wear and tear of life on your body. The idea is that someone who is around 90 could be as healthy as a 60-year-old, so people could stay alive longer until better therapies come along. And then they can receive newer and stronger treatments that would help them live even longer. Pat, I know you're targeting 100. Any interest in going for 1,000?
Well, I talked to the producer about that, John, and I have decided 500 would be about it. I'm not going past 500 years. I don't care what they want to do, and I don't care if they need another show host here on the 700 Club. They're going to have to get one. When I hit 400, they'll have to be looking for a replacement.
Well, that'll give him 100 years to get that done.
That's right. Well, you know, Noah, look, what was he, 500 when he started building the ark? He built it till he was 600. You know, so
Stranger things have
I
happened.
don't know why people live so long. There was some theory about the mold and spores in the earth because of the flood. I don't know, but whatever it is, you can live a lot longer. I mean, all this stuff they do to you, but unlike an old car, you know, you put in a new transmission, you put in a new distributor, you put in some new spark plugs, you put on new tires, and the whole thing just keeps on running down the road. So
You're doing well.
I'm doing well. Hallelujah. Okay.